There's a lot of law firm owners out there that either want to add another practice area or they want to add another office or whatever it is. They want to bolt onto their business and they're thinking like, when should I make this leap and what should that look like? So what did it look like for you to take this new opportunity?
It feels so simple, but it was a very arduous decision because, well, first of all, I was working in a big firm, so there wasn't really an option to work 9 to 5 and then work on this other thing on the side. I realized that I was working like basically from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to sleep, and weekends, and was in trial a lot as well. So I realized that I wasn't able to fully build this tool unless I went and gave it my all and spent my full time on it. So the thought process there was, I want to go do this. I'm always going to regret it if I don't go do this. If I do go do it, and if I fail, I can always come back to my law firm, knock on the door, and a year later say, give me back my job. And I would get it. And, the worst thing that could happen is I lost like a year of salary, but I would know that I had done it. I decided through that process that I was going to leave. Now, that departure was obviously very scary. You go from having a steady paycheck at a firm to now bank accounts only going down because we're not making revenue yet. And I'm only paying this one engineer who I'm having build things for me, and I'm not getting paid anything. But throughout that process, I learned so much. And I got to a point where I could set my own milestones of whether I thought that we were going in the right direction for me to keep doing this full time, or whether I would need to find other paths to potentially go back. And luckily it has worked out and has been a great decision. For example, you're saying adding another practice area, that might require you to actually step back in some ways from what you're doing in your core practice to allow you to propel forward maybe 6 months later. And so I highly encourage taking that risk, because that 6 months or whatever that time period is that you might lose is definitely worth taking the potential opportunity that lies on the other side.
There is no other option. Success is the only option.
There is absolutely that. And I think you illustrated it very well there, Dorna. And as we all know, business isn't usually just like straight up and to the right. There's a lot of ups and downs. And so I'm going to want to learn a little bit more about some of the obstacles you face. And look, if you're a law firm owner out there listening to this and you're facing some obstacles right now, trying to figure out this business side of the things, you could go to thelawfirmsecret.com and we could unpack that for you and jump through some of those obstacles and figure out what those look like, just like we're about to do with Dorna here in just a moment. So Dorna, for you in your journey, what was the big obstacle? What was it? And what did you do to overcome it?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest obstacles for me, sometimes lawyers going into the law practice but not really understanding as much about the business side, which I know you guys help a lot with, I think that was my biggest obstacle, is that I went to undergrad, I went straight into law school, then went straight to working for a law firm, and a law firm that was a big firm that gave me a lot of support, which in some ways became a crutch. Like, I never created my own shell for a document. I would send it, we had a word processing department, I'd be like, create me a shell for this document. So there were a lot of things I sort of didn't know how to do yet, and I had to just dive right straight into. And I think these are some of the tips that I now, when we have customers, I try to share these with them so they don't get hung up on them. But I would say the number one thing that I didn't really fully understand when I left the firm was really getting a good idea of the cost of acquiring a customer and what that means for your margins and whether you're gonna make money. So before we launched what is now Gavel, we were specifically working in this domestic violence space. And we launched a product that was $15. We didn't really have like a market already. I didn't have a ton of, we had some of these legal aid organizations that we were working with, but we needed a broader market. So we were spending money on Google ads. Those Google ads were sometimes more than $15 to acquire that customer. And then on top of that, it was very high touch. There were people who were asking us for help on, for example, someone was like, I don't even know how to download these things from my zip file. So me, as the only support person for this company, downloaded all these documents for this person because I wanted to provide really good service, went to the post office, mailed it off for them. So really, we were losing money on some of these early sales because I didn't have a really good understanding of how much it would cost to acquire a customer, what the pricing model was that was right. And that was something that, now we sell directly into law firms, but that's been something that's always in the back of my mind, is understanding if you have these costs that go in, how are you going to get customers and how are you going to make that profitable? And I think a lot of lawyers are having to think about that now because the billable hour is changing. A lot of people are dropping it, and especially with efficiency growing, they're dropping it in favor of alternative fee models. that actually make them more profitable and that make more sense for them and their clients. So I would say that's a big learning that I had that I would have thought about a little bit more in depth if I could go back in time.
Well, so huge. So first of all, congratulations, because many lawyers, business owners stop. They don't figure that out. Like if I say, what is your cost to acquire a client? That like I get deer in the headlights. So this cost to acquire a client versus what it is for your lifetime value of your client, and lifetime value of your client being not what you just sell the service for, but what is minus cost. What's your gross margin on that service? And understanding how those two things relate is super important. Now, one of the reasons why we love law firms, and not only because they do great work and God's work, in my opinion, but it's also because their CAC to LTV ratio, when they get it right, is usually very high. It's a great ratio. So it makes it a wonderful business to be in when you can figure it out. But if they get their cost per acquisition and their LTV wrong, AK said differently, they don't know how to market correctly, or they don't know how to sell correctly, and their cost per client acquisition is too high, or they don't charge the right fee and they have too many inefficiencies, then their gross margin is low and now their ratio goes away and they end up not profitable, right? So what you did was, rather than go, you know what, I gotta scale this thing, you said, no, let me jump in and let me serve my clients. I know I'm going to have to be the one that downloads all these into a zip file, but I'm willing to do that because A, it's right for the client, and B, it's going to teach me how this needs to be done and what obstacles we have to overcome. And so MPS, I mean, the ability to do the non-scalable, I think, is a real value bomb for people listening. Would you agree?
It absolutely is. And it's not even just doing the unscalable at the start, but also even if you've grown a law firm and now you're in a phase where a particular system in the firm seems to be extremely inefficient, being willing to step up and step into that role and actually doing it again to figure out where the inefficiency is, that's unscalable. And usually as a law firm owner, when you get to that point, probably not the most ideal or your favorite thing in the world to have to do to go step back into the day-to-day grind. But it also shows us a lot and gives you a lot of feedback on what could be broken and why a particular system may be inefficient. So Dorna, I absolutely applaud you for that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it probably also identified for you a lot of opportunities within the early phases there too. Would you agree?
Definitely. There are some parts of the business that you're just never going to have enough time to be deeply inside of. But when you, like you're saying, when you're identifying that there could be problems places, you need to dive in and understand it deeply yourself so that you can help your team work through it. And then you can coach others as you're growing, especially if you're scaling up the number of people who are at your firm.
The master class is, when you find an obstacle, jump in with both feet, do the unscalable, unpack it, figure out what the obstacle is that we need to overcome the obstacle, and then put people in place or systems in place or software in place to conquer that obstacle, and then step back and go look for the next one. And at some point, your business will get so big that you won't be able to be in everything, but hopefully you've trained your team to be able to identify and fix the same things that you just did. And so that's the idea of scalability. But a lot of people listening to this, law firm owners listening to this, are literally, it's like them and a part-time, receptionist, right? And they're just slammed, and all their calls go to their cell phone. And if somebody tries to call their cell phone, they get the message that the voicemail box is full. And they're going to court during the day or doing legal work during the day and calling their prospects back at night. And they're just like, I can't get a job because I don't have a car, and I can't get a car because I don't have a job. They're in this circular world, right? And so what did you do? Like, what was a key for you, Dorna, to be able to break through that circular world to break out to the next level?
Yeah, I think that's something that I would say prioritization is the answer. And I think it's something that carries forward no matter how big you are and no matter how many people you have supporting you. Every time we add an employee, I think, oh, this is going to be so much easier, but it's not. You still have to prioritize, and there's just more on your list to do. So being able to sort of really make lists and figure out where the impact of those choices and the places where you could spend your time are. And sometimes having to honestly just say no to certain things. There are some things that you just aren't going to be able to do, or you're going to have to leave for later. And that's actually how you know that you're prioritizing well, is when you're having to make difficult decisions about what to say no to and what are the top priorities that will help you propel forward.